Yeah, well, Pam always likes to sit way up front, and I like to sit back. We all have our personal space that feels good. I used to like to do other things, so if you guys in the back are doing other things, I will understand. Not checking the phone though, like it's a modern other thing, but it would be like,
Oh, I didn't see that. We got me one too.
what do I have to pick up at the door? If ever gets boring. Are we still on? No, I'm not. Yeah, I can. Well, we do have to get started on time because though I got 2 weeks, this first week I couldn't resist doing it all. So Pam, my wife, who's a far more experienced this kind of presenter than I am, said in the beginning, 60 slides. I can only get through 35. So I let her have a look at them, edited them, and we got it down like 50. But she's right, you can hardly get through 35. So this first week out of 2, we will not have much discussion, I'm just saying. And we're going to have to use the front, probably the front view. But I'm fine till 10:30 or beyond if I have to, if you want to ask one-on-one questions. But next week, I only now currently have 33 slides. So I think we'll have 10 to 15 minutes of actual discussion. But any specific questions, please kind of keep towards that after 10 o'clock time so that I can share this entire presentation. In background, I'm Roger Black, by the way, longtime pastor, retired. That's what long time means, I guess. And historian, theologian, American history graduate at St. Olaf. Any American history graduates here? Then I know what to look out for. During which, important for today, I did a social and intellectual history class, which is kind of talking about the back and forth of events and documents across history. And theologian, I did do a PhD while I was doing work as a pastor still in historical theology. I did that. I did a presentation last fall on the Nicene Creed, which was more like that. But next week, from the theology side, or maybe we should say, in the case of Christian nationalism, the ideology side, we'll be looking at the faiths that feed into Christian nationalism, evangelicalism, and a branch of evangelicalism, Pentecostalism. So if you want to bone up on your evangelicalism, Pentecostalism, you'll be all ready for next week. Today also, in talking about the history of Christian nationalism, and particularly white Christian nationalism, I realized that you had a 3-part presentation back in the fall of 2022 when I wasn't quite here yet, where Pastor Larry Pennell, did a presentation on that. So the second portion, we're just going to go a quick run through until the 1950s and 60s, okay? And I realized this is history, most of the bulk of it we lived, so we have a lot of feelings and impressions. And if I step on any toes, this is personal. I'm giving my impressions of really the origins of white Christian nationalism and how it surges from time to time. So I think I gave all the caveats. No questions. It's like telling your kids in the car, don't ask any questions, right? So anyway, the religious and political rise of white Christian nationalism in the USA And then I called it White Christian Nationalism 2.0. And we got to sort of go back. Okay. Oh, all righty. First, I want to begin about 10 minutes of identifying white Christian nationalism. And I want to call attention to your handout, the one handout, not the bibliographies, which I'll talk about at the very end, but the other one. And that one has helped students of white Christian nationalism identify what it is. And it's got 6 questions. I want you to take that as homework this week. And on the other side is kind of the discussion sheet that the people that used that survey, Perry and Whitehead, Taking America Back for God, used in order to interpret with 50 people what their answers are. And we'll do a little bit of that at the start next time. But you can answer those questions on a continuum, and that'll help identify where you stand. One of the biggest trends in studying Christian nationalism today is to clearly label the challenge as white Christian nationalism. In other words, that racism, our original sin, as Jim Wallace has put it, is behind Christian nationalism, is always included in the kind of Christian nationalism that gets to be difficult for a society. This is in keeping with the growth of race as a central concern for America as a whole. Amanda Tyler, who has a book on how to end Christian nationalism, put it this way: racism is deeply interconnected with Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is an expression of white supremacy. So we're going to take seriously all 3 words involved in this topic. White, it is a matter of race. In fact, when nationalism is identified in historically black churches, we kind of think about that as extreme patriotism in that case. There never is that superiority part, that black is more superior than white. Well, nationalism does exist in black churches. Episcopal Bishop Michael Curry, who is black, said, "I'm 67 years old, and I have known since childhood that the KKK professed to be Christian. We grew up knowing it. So we knew there was an unholy conflation of Christianity and white supremacy, and it was often tinged with Americanism." Christian, the belief that Christianity is superior to all other faiths and that America should be officially Christian. That's why Christian and white Christian nationalism mean. In addition, some white Christian nationalists would point to Christianity in America being superior to all other Christianity. Think Mormons at this point. I can still remember going to the Mormon Center in Salt Lake City as like a 21-year-old on the way back from the Pacific Lutheran on a bus to St. Olaf. And Pam and I were cornered, and we were engaged to be married in a year. But they said, "How would you like to be married in heaven?" That was the dish, right? Oh, okay, no, not really. Or something like that. And the point that the whole display made, and they upgraded, I saw it like 5 years ago, is that the ultimate move of God was to bring Jesus to America. That's an American religion. That's a different kind of Christian nationalism. And nationalism, the persisting myth that America was founded as a Christian nation, an extreme kind of patriotism that worships, hence it's ism. It's like 2 isms, right? The ism of patriotism is nationalism. One person put it this way: patriotism is a love of country. Nationalism is an extreme form of patriotism that demands supremacy over all other allegiances. What does that sound like? That sounds like what our view of being a Christian is, right? So why Christian nationalism? ELC advocacy adopts a definition. ELC advocacy, 2 weeks ago, you heard a presentation of one arm of that, our Office of Public Policy. It's taken from the Perry and Whitehead book. Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that idealizes and advocates a fusion of certain Christian views with American civil life. It is as ethnic and political as it is religious. They go on to say the Christianity of Christian nationalism represents something more than religion. It includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and heteronormativity. We're not going to go into that. Along with divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. It is as ethnic and political as this religion. I put in the ... right? Three early parts, to understanding that. I'm going to have trouble with this. I can see that the belief system that is included, selected beliefs, I think the definition says, is one bullet point. The U.S. Constitution was divinely inspired and enjoys godly status. And of course, perpetuating the myth that Puritans were involved in making that. 2, that Christianity should be a privileged religion in the U.S., that the nation holds a special status in God's eyes, city on the hill, and that good Americans must hold Christian beliefs. And we're going to unpack these historically this morning. In the Taking Back America from God book, we should have hidden those slides till next week. Sorry. There are 3 main points made, and that is that Christian nationalism perpetuates the myth of the Christian nation, that it looks back, it has nostalgia for past glory, and I think you'll see that especially in the moral majority of the 70s and 80s as well as today, and it has an apocalyptic view of the nation's future. In other words, if we don't change something, we're going downhill and we will have lost America's great hope for the world. Again, personal view. So we're going to review the history really quick, 10 minutes top, leading up to the 50s. The first and probably most important is that it is an extension of Christianity being thought of as, what everyone should be. The doctrine of discovery. The Roman Catholic Church, through a papal bull, a papal proclamation, issued many of these thoughts, but particularly this one in 1452 we're putting forward, that explorers ought to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all pagans, we'll say, Saracens, and other enemies of Christ, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and to convert them to Christ, other enemies of Christ and their use and profit. That's what Columbus and other discoverers, particularly sent by the church, were called to do. Amanda Tyler writes, European invaders of this continent were armed with not just weapons and disease, but also the blessing of the church in the form of the doctrine of discovery. A series of papal bulls that justified the seizure of land inhabited by people who were not Christians, all in the name of God. I was thinking today, when we get to evangelicalism, what marks it out is evangelizing others so they will become Christian. There's a lot of similarities still in this. So you'll see that rather than just preaching the gospel and relying, on the Holy Spirit to convert people, we got to do it no matter what it takes. He created the myth. They created the myth of America being born as an intentionally Christian nation. In a sense, the Puritans wrote the script for Christian nationalism. Before they arrived, their captain, John Winthrop, said this: "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill, and the eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work that we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall shame the faces of many of God's worthy servants, and cause their prayers to be turned into curses." This city on the hill concept, light shining, let the light shine, like in the Sermon on the Mount, based on the Sermon on the Mount, was what one group that arrived in New England, the Puritans, brought with them. Several times now in the last 50 years, it's been perpetuated as those people were behind our U.S. Constitution in saying we should be a Christian nation. James Kennedy, who was pastor at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Cape Coral, Florida, was one of those, and I bought one of his books, used, and I watched one of the videos that one of his accompanying persons did, and here's some of the points. That the principles of the founding fathers found these principles were found in the Bible. The government by law is not by men, based on the Ten Commandments. That all men are created equal, having inalienable rights, essentially based on those commandments. Later, you'll see Barton. I think it's Mark Barton. Can't remember. That's in that book by Stuart Chris. Has written greatly on this and tried to make it a part of things. And the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., I didn't have the gumption to go in there. A year ago when we were there, would represent that view again. Along with that, the attitudes and actions of white Christians towards the native peoples, think again, the papal bull didn't help, obviously, was the first macro aggression, I'd call it, large aggression against people on the basis of race. The Christian assumption that the Indians were heathens, unworthy of respect, and undeserving of life or liberty on their own terms was the first assault on America. A violent movement that eventually would lead to the Trail of Tears in the mid-19th century. I found this map to show you that this wasn't undiscovered land that we were kind of coming upon, that the tribes were living in all of these areas of this land that is really God's land. A second macro aggression, of course, is what we did to African peoples, the forced enslavement of Black African people. Like Native Americans, the Africans would be deemed heathen by their Christian masters and unworthy of treatment as full human beings. In slavery, white Christian nationalism continued to burrow itself into American soil. Think of that nasty weed burrowing itself into our fields. This chattel enslavement of Black Africans wasn't ours alone. I had another map we had to take out, but it showed the concentration of percent of population in the South, particularly before 1860. But a worldwide map, 12 million Africans were resettled. We only settled 500,000 of them in chattel slavery. But think the Caribbean and South America, the new world, the better world. All this is to say that the Puritans actually didn't write the Constitution, although that was one of the groups that came to seek religious freedom. And you can think of it in three ways: the Puritans, William Penn and the Quakers, Roger Williams in Rhode Island colony. Also, particularly in the South, but everywhere. And think of most of us, our ancestors who were German or Scandinavians coming for economic improvement and a new start. They didn't write the Constitution. Although one of my musical favorites, 1776, talks about the farm from, are you going to write it? If you guys have that in your head, are you going to write it? No, 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 no. We need you to write it, Thomas. So other groups were represented there. But by and large, the three that were residents in Europe before, Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin, had the greatest influence on the Constitution.
Talking about the Declaration of Independence. They were the three that wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, I'm talking about founding fathers, the three founding fathers. Jefferson. Yeah, okay. It was a musical reference that made that difficult. Now I'm talking about them being representative of the writers of the Constitution. Actually, in this too, we really haven't dealt with the Articles of Confederation. But if we do that, we'll be like most American history courses that never get past the Civil War, right? But that was a good point. Thank you. There were these other sources for coming, but when it comes to the Constitution, the children of the Enlightenment were the ones that they wanted to form a new government. The founding fathers were deists, and that meant that they believed in a general God over the universe who kind of wound up the world and let human beings have at it and manage. Andrew Seidel, who is an atheist, but his book is very, very good on this, writes that Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and even Franklin and other founders did not think that religion was a source of morality, but its substitute. The educated elite, including the founders, achieved morality independent of religion. Didn't need it, right? But they failed to extend the possibility of that to others. Rather, they thought religion was needed for the commoners. The enlightened could use reason, their advanced reason, to discern morality. So they needed no religion other than a bare kind of deism or theism, belief in God in general. Washington referred to the masses as the grazing multitude. Adams spoke of the common herd of mankind, or common persons, with no need of learning, eloquence, and genius. As for Jefferson, he edited his New Testament to take out everything having to do with miracles and Jesus' divinity. Deists as a whole differ from the Puritans in believing in a harmonious universe, proving the beneficence of God rather than the fire and brimstone preaching of Puritans. So they would think, well, maybe the fire and brimstone preaching would keep common people in check, but so it really is unreal that we got a constitution that would serve all people in democracy when they brought about kind of aristocratic, ideas of some people are better than other people from their time in Europe and from their study of philosophers like Locke and Spinoza. So they were about having an experiment, a new idea in America, having experienced the fusion of church and state in the old world. The founders wanted the colonies to have no official religion. Rather, America would explicitly not be a Christian nation, beholden to any king or established religion. All Christians would live free of religious tyranny because their government would have no interest or say in their spiritual life, bringing about wanting to have a wall of separation between church and state. Ron Chernow writes, he's the guy who wrote the Hamilton biography. He wrote, the Constitution separated state and church even before the First Amendment reinforced that separation. The best government posture toward religion is one of passive tolerance, not active promotion of an established church. Regardless of their personal beliefs, the founders chose to safeguard liberty by building this wall of separation between church and state. So think about later, what Christian nationalists want to do to the schools, pull it over here, and what the founders thought of as the best way for a democratic republic to be pursued. Adding to the Constitution, which also, said there'd be no religious expectation on the part of office holders. That was in the Constitution, along with a few other things. The Bill of Rights was written with the First Amendment that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And this protection went both ways. It was protection for the church and the state. In fact, James Madison, the writer of the Bill of Rights, said in 1822, "I have no doubt that every new example will succeed as every past one has done, in knowing that religion and government will both exist in greater purity the less they are mixed together." And he argued that separation exists as much then to protect religion as to protect the state. Did we do that in 20 minutes? That was the idea.
Close.
Okay. Now the bulk of it, I want to talk about Christian nationalism in contemporary times. And we discussed this at home. Contemporary always means like in the time of those living, or it can mean after the medieval period. Or no, I mean modern means after the medieval period. So contemporary is the better word. With our times, if we're knowledgeable about Latin. Now I sound like the deist. Okay. Took out a bunch of slides, so I just want to say three major things between our founding and 1950s are Andrew Jackson and the way in which he pursued taking the land away from the natives, killing them if necessary. We're not, how can we not be political? It sounds a lot like how we're talking about Iran. I might have to kill more people, quote unquote. And then taking them to the most beautiful areas known as our what do we call it again? In any case, the Civil War, which led to kind of a separation between how people looked at church and state, not just South and North, but it's easiest to talk about South and North. Reconstruction, which started well, but Jim Crow, after there weren't those kinds of support for blacks being 100% people, Jim Crow turning it all around, and the KKK being the worst example of white Christian nationalism, using the actual crosses, white gowns, to do their work. The recent movie that we saw had KKK in the middle of the night, one of the Sinners, the nominated movie. But after World War II, which was big in for several different reasons, and the slides to come are like that, women getting more involved in the workforce, blacks serving in the military, though they did not get the same benefits when they came back. According to the GI Bill, they didn't get a home at great rates or education. Figure that one out. Yet the post-World War situation, especially in dealing with the Soviet Union, led to this Red Scare, led to a kind of ongoing. You may just look at this as an up and down effect of isolationism. You know, we want to make sure that we are the great nation that we are, and then led to this kind of so pulling back from the globalist type movements that created the UN out in the late 40s and 50s, and then also searching within to make sure that we had the right people here. This idea of a wall comes up in various ways, doesn't it? And one of those ways is kind of ideologically, we're going to build that wall. One of these ways is, well, an actual physical wall, which sounded ludicrous when it was begun. In this case, it's an ideological wall. So FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, I'm from Illinois originally, Wisconsin Senator Joe McCarthy led this kind of look inward from 47 to 54. Truman gave the executive order in 47 that got it started. And then McCarthy by 1950 was leading the congressional look, the House for Un-American Activities Committee. And it lasted through 54. At the same time, you have to understand, you build up the ideology that you live with, you know? And so they started to build up the ideology. I mean, this is a wall, right? In the mid 50s, changing the Pledge of Allegiance, which had been part of our country since 1892, but it didn't include the phrase "under God," which interestingly Lincoln had used at Gettysburg. But what was he doing? He was creating a national cemetery when they were there. So, and if you read Lincoln, and I've read Lincoln quite a bit, he does use religion. So Lincoln is one of the people that helped create this problem of using religion as kind of a civil undergirding, right? So it was added to the pledge on June 14th, 1954. It was signed by President Eisenhower on Flag Day and amended this pledge to under God. I don't know. So many things have been taken from us in the last few years that when we get to situations and where you hear the Pledge of Allegiance, I think it was used at one of the swim meets I was at instead of the singing of the national anthem. It's like, And when you think about putting, and I will lose some people here, I know, but this is personal. When you think about putting your hand over your heart during the national anthem, I now have some qualms. It's not an expectation anyhow. So that's part of our time we live in. In God we trust being added to the currency. First added the coins in 1864 in order to boost morale. See, Lincoln was using that, but officially mandated on July 11th, 1955, and became the national motto, replacing E pluribus unum, out of many one. Out of many one sounds like diversity. That sounds like we should have stuck with that, But now in God we trust, which mainly bothers atheists and agnostics, but they are part of our people. Right? Okay, we begin this journey with our beloved Billy Graham. I got to go to a crusade in 77 in Milwaukee. There was one when I served in Milwaukee in my first parish. And Billy Graham was a Baptist preacher who became close to presidents through kind of being a president pastor to presidents. And you got to back up here and think about it as part of civil religion, that we would have a chaplain who would open the congressional session. Interesting. We would sing the, national anthem and have a prayer. Well, Billy Graham made that more overt helping to create the National Prayer Breakfast. When it said to be members of the fellowship in the beginning, they were kind of being subtle about how they began. But his work, as an evangelical, who is one of the main principles is to try to convert everybody to Christianity, was let into the Oval Office, was let into the Congress as a part of what Robert Bella called civil religion. I have his essay written in 1969. I can bring it next week if anybody wants to read it, which calls attention to all of the things in our society where Christianity is kind of a part of that society, which you would say not as a national religion, but just as a kind of a creeping kind of thing, which you imagine. We started using the word Judeo-Christian, and some people will say Judeo-Christian was just trying to be nice, add the Jewish part. But we started to use that in order to take away from what a aggression that is on other non-Christian people. These rights that emerged in the 60s is what really created the first big rise of white Christian nationalism with moral majority and Ronald Reagan. Civil rights, of course, began much earlier in 54 with the passing of Brown versus Board of Education, ending segregation in the schools. Rosa Parks, think the schools, integrating the schools, Little Rock, things like that. But led in 1964 after President Kennedy's death in 63 to a Southerner, LBJ, helping to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I read a book about Kennedy and King. There's a title, Kennedy and King. Whether President Kennedy would have gotten there or not is questionable. But Johnson, being a Southerner, understood, and being such a tit for tat kind of person, trading things off, a lobbyist kind of person. He understood things and how to make them work in America. The 65 Voting Rights Act, and then, of course, legalizing interracial marriage. By the way, that's not small. And if you see the movie Loving, wasn't Loving? Yeah, you'll see that. But like Bob Jones University was based largely on the fact that we can't have blacks here because they might date each other. And then what might happen? You will have a mixing of the races and whatever. Okay. So this led to particularly women working at equal rights at the same time with major steps like the Equal Pay Act in 63 by Kennedy. And then, Phyllis Chafley's writings are down below, I think. And then, not Phyllis Chafley, yeah, Betty Friedan, Feminine Mystique in 1963. And then the ERA being passed, but failing ratification because of Phyllis Chafley. Okay, I made one big mistake here. So you get this deal, we started looking at, you build an ideological wall, right, against the communism. Well, okay, now our wall that we built for white males is beginning to pass. Uh-oh. Also LGBTQ plus rights, 69, the Stonewall riot, and 73, this is amazing, right? The American Psychiatric Association removing homosexuality from its list of mental illnesses. 2015, the legalization of same-sex marriage. Along with that, you've got political events. I like to call this the not so great nature of the USA. And if you're getting a vibe here, in a study of American history, you'll see that we aren't really that exceptional. We aren't really that great. So these, coupled with these movements that were challenging, you have the Vietnam War, which ended without us winning, Next week when we have Palm Sunday and we talk about theology, I think it's a perfect day to talk about Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday. And triumphalism versus, Christ coming as one of us and winning a victory in a certain different kind of way, but through the cross. Because triumphalism has always been there as a new world vision, We took those savage natives, we took those, we took over the land. Watergate, which, kind of broke the myth of innocence of the United States for a lot of people and a lot of people that are drawn to white Christian nationalism. So these two events led many to declare that America's perceived goodness was always a thin veneer over America's flawed human nature. Of course, our own Lutheran Christian theology would tell us that we really are a government and nation who, though capable of great things, are also capable of great evil. All right. So in response to this, the moral majority with Jerry Falwell, where'd that come from? It's up there. With Jerry Falwell being in charge, responded to these countercultural movements for rights that were not for white straight males, ushering in an era of politically charged Christianity and Christian nationalism. Of course, his own university, it wasn't called Liberty originally, but what he was trying to do in other ways was to preserve that kind of government by white males. The big one is to respond to what's called Green versus Kennedy in 1970. Because after civil rights, what happened to the schools? We were watching the Juneau Milwaukee team play yesterday, and I was thinking, yeah, we were in Milwaukee in the 70s and early 80s, and there were some great moves in integration, but it's a great, it's a very segregated city in many ways for blacks and whites. So it came back to mind. But what happened was creating of these private schools, right? And they wanted to have all white people in those schools, can't be dating each other, might have interracial marriage or whatever. And so therefore, when Green versus Kennedy said that you had to be integrated or your money would be taken away, you would become liable to taxes, you wouldn't be tax exempt. That's what drove the moral majority. At that time, they were Southern Baptists even were for Roe v. Wade, for the opportunity or possibility of abortion, at least in the extreme cases. So this is what really drove them, losing their tax exemption. Money always talks, right? The birth of televangelism happened at the same time. Well, Falwell was a part of it. Pat Robertson, the Christian Broadcasting Network, Jim Baker, and Jimmy Swaggart. I saw Jim Baker as an older person. It looks all wrong. What? We look wrong to other people. In addition to that, Paul Wyrick, a Racine native, we always have to bring in these Wisconsin. I'm a full-blown Wisconsinite now. Co-founded the Heritage Foundation at this time, one of the prominent think tanks in 73, and he famously declared in 1980, "I don't want everybody to vote. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the election quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down." Who don't you want to vote? In addition, Wyrick, along with Viguerie, Richard Viguerie, helped turn around the election of Ronald Reagan in 80 through mass mailing expertise. So don't think these media use. I'm not going to do anything on Facebook and the 2016 election, but whatever. You can do it yourself, right? What does the moral majority stand for? And I got a lot of these ideas from a class in 73 and a professor, Erling Jorstad at St. Olaf. He wrote a book about it. Consisted mostly of religious groups who interpreted the Bible literally and it believed in absolute ethics, condemned liberal attitudes and behaviors, argued for the restoration of traditional moral values. Again, what happened in the 60s and 70s. They call it the long 60s, by the way. When you start reading, it's like everything was a part of that. Rights, the driving for rights had to be turned back. So they began to measure people according to these standards. They had a report card, and in the election, oh, wait, what happened to that? Oh, I must be going forward. Okay, sorry. We'll say, okay, so Ronald Reagan ran for president at that time, and he said, there has been a wave of humanism and hedonism in the land. I think there's a hunger in this land for a spiritual revival or return to a belief in moral absolutes, the same morals upon which the nation was founded. Interesting. The report cards they kept not only on Jimmy Carter, who was one of their own, Southern Baptist, that's interesting to think about, but also on the senators, including Gaylord Nelson, 14 different ways in which issues were graded, including the restoration of prayer and Bible reading in public schools and those other issues on the previous page. And all of them were voted out except for Alan Cranston. So California always holds out, right? Ronald Reagan furthered Christian nationalism in many ways, laid the groundwork for the fusing of white nationalism and Christianity. You saw that in the moral absolutes quote previously, paved the way for Donald Trump with his call for American exceptionalism and to restore American greatness. I haven't got the gumption to read the Reagan biography yet, but I'm going to soon. Parallel driving out Native Americans in movies with calling for communism to be removed from Germany, kind of like the cowboy riding the range, out there on his own. Sound familiar? Supported Congress abolishing the fairness doctrine of the FCC. And this is one of the worst things that happened to us because it opened up the possibility of right-wing broadcasters like Rush Limbaugh and media giants like Rupert Murdoch broadcasting Christian nationalism all day long. And the white, well, I've seen them. The white males. No, now I'm really going to get out there. That I've heard listening to Christian radio in the 70s and 80s or right-wing radio were those kinds of individuals that would be fueled by this. I used to be listening. WIBA here at one point had all the sports on, and you'd be listening to a Brewer game and forget to turn off that station on the radio, and then the next morning you'd get a little piece of this. It would be interesting. Kristen Dumas, who was at Bethel this year, wrote, to the delight of evangelicals, this is in Jesus and John Wayne, how he was kind of the John Wayne figure. Reagan brought his cowboy conservatism to the global stage. After all, as evangelicals saw it, the Cold War wasn't really all that different from the Wild West. Rules might have to be broken, but the end justifies the means. I don't know. Iran sounds a little like that today. So combined with the work of moral majority, President Reagan brought about the first major wave of Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism. Quickly, you didn't tell me when it was 5 minutes till.
We're looking.
Somehow after George H.W. Bush and an unpopular war, because you got to win everything, right? Bill Clinton was elected. But it helped to bring about a new religious right because of his own personal issues. And scandal helped to shape that from the beginning. Looking into what happened in Arkansas, the Whitewater scandal. Also, Ken Starr then getting involved in looking into just the right things led by the right people, reporting to the right people. And then this affair with Monica Lewinsky, leading to this first impeachment in our contemporary era, right? But not his removal. So think about that, how that plays out with the religious part. You are just elevated in your views. What do you mean you don't like the Bible, what the Bible says, and their moral absolutes? So, adding to this, think about the work of Phyllis Schlafly, and I mean the negative work of Phyllis Schlafly. Hillary Clinton took on a different role for a first lady, tried to do a health care reform right from the beginning, and it was an affront to some Christians in the evangelical world. And then also putting up with her husband's improprieties. So it led to backlash again with the controverted election of a Southerner, a man who knew a lot of people in the Arab world. And George W. Bush's presidency brought about an unprecedented infusion of evangelical faith into policy, rhetoric, and daily operation. He created the Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, and it allowed religious organizations to compete for federal funding. I think the other Whitewater group is like that was led by Cheney for a while, the group that does arms in the Middle East. Following the 9/11 attack, the administration adopted a tone that often foreign policy was about good versus evil, kind of a new crusade. And during this time, two very prominent ideologues, Rusas Rushdoony and David Barton, began their work, and they were allowed inside the administration. Rushdoony called for a return to biblical law in America and Christians to exercise dominion over the earth. We'll talk about dominionism next week, and all of its inhabitants. And Barton argued for the myth of America being created as a Christian nation. We all had difficulty with the attack on us on 9/11. But what were some of the effects of it? It helped to bring about a rise in interest in white Christian nationalist concern, with its increased xenophobia, fear of foreigners, also targeted for the color of their skin. When I think about racial profiling, I think about the Patriot Act. Bringing about the U.S. Patriot Act, which took away freedoms, among other things, broadening the definition of terrorism and allowing for the indefinite detention of non-citizens who were certified as national security agencies, and bringing about the creation of the Homeland Security Act and ICE, which, by the way, it had been put in by executive order by President Bush in October 2001, but then made part of law in 2002. 9/11 and the New Christian Right, we're going to have to deal with subtitles now. Submitted our perceptions as Americans and Christians as an us versus them view of both our nation and our religion. Sikhs and Hindus and other non-Muslims were treated as Muslims. It led to acting like a nation afraid of black and brown immigrants, of others who are not like us, and led to our own presidency. Still, against all odds, President Barack Obama came about. And people had great hopes for this doing away with the white part of Christian nationalism. Early on, though, they formed the Tea Party, which was the precursor to our own MAGA today. And from the beginning, Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, said the single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Remember that? Don't allow any time. But there's a visceral part. There's a visual part that white Christian nationalists saw from the very beginning. And the backlash was slow and steady, beginning as a challenge to his citizenship, birth certificate done. Trump took on the cause. I have more here, but we won't do it. A challenge to his own pastor and his religious faith, right? Pastor Wright in his church in Chicago. And Michelle Norris, who read a book, wrote, "The election of Barack Obama marked not the end of racial anxiety, but rather the beginning of a thorny new chapter in American history, where the subject of race would be ever more complex. Race is still a tender bruise on our body politic, and if anything, the rise of a black president and the tanning of America through rapid demographic shifts only intensified the throb." It's a great book based on, 6 words about race that she asked for from a bunch of people. I know I'm getting the 5-minute warning now. And then during that time, though, one really awful thing happened, and that's the birth, the Citizens United being brought in so that there would be no limit to the money spent for political candidates. And it's a very bad thing for the oligarchs in the United States, who are largely white males who wanted the leadership to remain. And they helped to secure the elections. So Donald Trump kind of became the godfather of white Christian nationalism. I always think of the head figure as not really caring about the ideology very much, I mean, even Hitler, he read a little bit, but he wasn't so ideological. He was like person to person. I can convert you when I talk to you one-on-one, And so that's why I look at Godfather as kind of a title. He upset a rights-fighting woman, taking over from the first black American president, and it became a rebirth of racism, misogyny, and xenophobia. His election validated and empowered WCN, white Christian nationalism, by offering a defender of their cultural, religious, and political influence. And they looked at him as a kind of Cyrus figure, Cyrus in the second Isaiah, a Persian leader, isn't this ironic? Modern day Iran, who freed Israel from Babylon. And even though Cyrus never really became a Jewish person, he was sort of a kind of Messiah figure. So Trump had his flaws, like the foreigner and pagan leader Cyrus, but he was called by God to lead them to greater glory, according to Isaiah 41:2. Of course, then white Christian nationalism got its time for a moment. Oh, just a second here. On the center stage, where everybody understood this, at least as Christian nationalism, the overt, not so much covert, combination of faith and politics that day, with these symbols, some of which you see there, Jesus with a cap on, make America great again. The Jericho marches on December 12th, previous to December 12th, 2020, and January 5th, which was marching around the Capitol and believing that just as in the Old Testament, the walls would come crumbling down, that Biden, newly elected, and his government would come down. President Trump's return then in 2025 on the basis of white Christian nationalism, leading to outrageous acts toward all non-white people. The sealing of that wall, he's not so much about ideology, but building that actual wall, or covering up under those shields, is just fine to get the job done. 111 detention centers. Think about after World War II when we found out about the Japanese detention centers. Shameful, right? And over 1,000 jails like our one in, I believe, Juneau, right? Juneau County, that could take in ICE people. Where are we today? Like many other times in world history, religious faith is being used to support the ruling class. The fear of U.S. becoming majority non-white by 2040 is one of the big things that have fueled it. You can remember it was called 2050 some 20 years ago, but now it's by 2040. What are we going to do to make that not happen? We're going to get rid of enough people. We're going to, kind of rule with an iron hand. The throwback to the good old days. I'm sorry. The good old days of what? White Christian nationalism. We had the pandemic that came into play. That kind of libertarianism that was adopted by many. You're not going to make me wear a mask. You're not going to make me not assemble white Christian as a Christian person. You know, libertarianism, which has some good parts and some bad parts, right? Increased persecution of the outsider, a time when brown and black people shouldn't have their democratic rights. They had been so uppity. And authoritarianism. If we can't get God's, desire for our country in any other way, God certainly doesn't mind an authoritarian leader bringing that about. And some other micro or macro aggressions. Next week, we are going to do the theology of white Christian nationalism. A word about the bibliographies. The resolution at the last assembly called for a study of white Christian nationalism in our churches, and also making available a list of books and other resources. That's what's on the front of that bibliography. Behind that is my own sources, many of which I'll get a chance to talk about in the theology portion next week. Questions, specific questions?
Just a second. Before we go into questions, because I'm going to turn the recording off and then you can stay and ask questions. People can leave. There are more of those copies up here. And there is also happening on April 15th in the morning and in the evening, a discussion of this book, which goes deeper into many of the things that Roger was talking about. And if you sign up, we are ordering books so that the fee for anybody would only be that $20 if you get it through us. So we would love it if you would do that.
I'm just setting my hand up after her.
Yeah, specific questions that
Okay, we're going to turn the recording off and then you can go ahead.
I'd like you to do that questionnaire part, by the way.